Hi, I'm Than Bennett. Thank you for listening to The Equipped. Faith Radio podcasts are only possible because of your support. Thank you for giving and for sharing with a friend. Maybe it's just an April Fool's joke. That was my first thought when I heard the news. I will explain to you in just a moment. Also, we're talking tariffs. A federal agency is dismantled, and a tragedy over the Potomac River. Hey everyone, I'm Than Bennett. This is The Equipped. I'm so glad that you have joined us for the conversation. Those are some of the headline stories that we'll be turning our attention to in just a moment. And of course, at the end of the broadcast, we will turn our attention to something that is beautiful in our world so that you can return back out into the world, postured in the beauty of your Creator and reflecting that beauty back into the world around you. And just a real quick welcome to any of you who are joining the Equipped community for the first time. We are a gathering of Jesus followers who come together each week around a newsletter and this broadcast to view all things in our world through the lens of the true and the beautiful. If that sounds like something that is of interest to you, I want to encourage you to jump on over to theequippednewsletter.com, add your email address, and you can get the newsletter version of this content directly to your inbox each and every week. We're going to start with the true. And again, when I heard the news, I thought maybe it's an April Fool's Day joke, even though it is only February. I'll explain right now on the true. So back in the 90s, I was a huge Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan fan. I mean, there were, of course, plenty of people in the world that jumped on the Chicago Bulls bandwagon during the 90s when Michael Jordan was carrying them to multiple championships. But I grew up in central Illinois, and so this fandom was pretty natural. I would lay in bed late at night, and I would listen to the radio, 6:70 a.m., I would listen to the play-by-play of the Chicago Bulls playing a rival and Michael Jordan inevitably pulling out game after game at the end. He seemed to just have a knack for the clutch, much like as we look toward the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs seems to have that knack in the NFL today. But I was a big Chicago Bulls fan, a big Michael Jordan fan, and so when they three-peated in the early 90s and then Michael Jordan just suddenly decided to take 2 years off and play baseball, it was a shock to me. And then he came back, and of course, upon his return, they completed another three-peat. So 6 consecutive years, essentially, for Michael Jordan winning the championship, 6 out of 8 years for the Chicago Bulls. And those are memories that I have from a very young age. I got to be honest, though, I have not been much of an NBA fan since the 90s. I love college basketball, but there is something about the NBA that has not appealed to me as much since that time. But earlier this week, when I heard the news of a stunning blockbuster trade, one of the biggest stars in the NBA, Luka Doncic, moving from the Dallas Mavericks to the Los Angeles Lakers in return for Anthony Davis, and there was a third team involved and some other players as well, but those were the two major pieces. When I heard about that trade being completed, my first thought was that it was an April Fool's Day joke. I literally thought maybe, did kind of a mental calculation, maybe it's April 1st already. Of course it wasn't. It's early February. We're nowhere close to April Fool's Day. But the news was so unbelievable to me that was my first thought. I was absolutely stunned, and I didn't think that this blockbuster trade could be real. Turned out I wasn't the only one. Later in the day, I read that one NBA player who was not sourced in the article I was reading, maybe that information is out there, but I am not aware of which NBA player it was, but that NBA player reacted this way. If Luka can be traded, anyone can be traded. It's a business. Now, on the one hand, I think it can be very easy to make too much of sports news, whether it's this or the Super Bowl or the World Series or my favorite Chicago Cubs, whatever it is, it can be easy to make too big a deal about sports news because even if you love sports and even if you follow sports like I do, news like this very likely has a very, very limited impact on your life or on your gospel invitation to make disciples. And I just want to pause right here. I put this note in the newsletter version, but even just saying that phrase, making disciples, That makes me so excited, friends. Making disciples is your mission and mine, and it thrills my heart that we have been called to that. And news like this has very little impact on that mandate of yours to make disciples. And so, even though it piqued my interest and there was a lot of breathless coverage and dramatic coverage of the news of this trade, I knew it was very unlikely to impact my personal reality as well. But I want you to think about that undisclosed player's reaction. Let me remind you what it was again. He said, if Luka can be traded, anyone can be traded. It's a business. I really think that statement should make you stop and think. I want you to ask yourself, is your reality that tenuous? Is your identity and your most important association that's subject to win? It's called the National Basketball Association. Luka's association, Anthony Davis's association, was with the teams from which they had been traded. What about your association? Is it that subject to whim? Is the foundation of who you are, is it just waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some news to fall that would shake that foundation? And I would suggest to you, I would declare to you that the unequivocal answers to those three questions should be no, no, and no. They should be no, because here are the truthful answers to those questions. Number one, your reality is held by the one who set the earth in place. Psalm 104:5. Number two, you have a name and a belonging, and both of those things are wrapped up within the name above all names, Isaiah 43:1. And finally, your foundation is firm, Isaiah 33:6. Perhaps you wish you were an NBA superstar. I love playing basketball. It's my second favorite sport. I will confess to you that my dream as a kid, and quite frankly, even if I could recreate it now, I would love to be the starting shortstop or the starting catcher for the Chicago Cubs. Baseball is my first athletic love. But even those dream jobs, playing in the NBA or playing in the major leagues, those dreams come tied to a reality in which your identity, your professional identity and your association, it can be stripped away in a moment's notice, and that can happen often without even you being consulted about it. But you, my friend, even though you don't possess that dream job in all likelihood, maybe there's some major league players or some NBA players listening, but I am certainly not one of those people, and my guess is that you are not either. But you are different. You have a no-trade clause, and your eternity cannot be shaken. You find that truth in Hebrews 12:28. And so today, as we reflect on this news about a blockbuster trade and the fact that the untouchable player was traded without his consultation, I want it to remind us that we should not operate in fear or trepidation. I challenge you, ask the Creator, ask the lover of your soul what it is that He desires of you this week, and then boldly set out in pursuit of it. After all, it's not a business. This, my friend, is a calling, and it's a promise. It was a really wild news week on the tariffs front. First, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that new tariffs would be levied against 3 countries. When the announcement was made, the plan was that goods that were imported into the United States from Mexico would be subject to a 25% tariff, so a 25% upcharge on goods that were coming into the United States. Goods from China were to be subject to a 10% tariff rate, and goods from Canada were to face a tiered schedule. They were to face either a 10% tariff for energy goods or a 25% tariff for non-energy goods. Now, the announcement of this, which I have linked to in the Equipped newsletter version at theequippednewsletter.com, it set off a flurry of activity, both in the political world and in the economic markets. China immediately announced counter tariffs at the United States, mostly around the energy sector, but some agriculture and related sectors as well. And then Mexico and Canada, they threatened retaliations and even announced some certain retaliations, but then they quickly actually reached a temporary agreement with President Trump in the United States to pause those tariffs on both sides until March 4th, 2025. So about little 5 weeks away, something like that. And the centerpiece of each of those agreements was the deployment of enforcement personnel by both Canada and Mexico to the respective borders with the United States. About 10,000 personnel from each country is going to be deployed to the borders. This is a discussion that was underway before the administration change in the United States, but this levying of tariffs seemed to trigger a more urgent deployment of those troops and rendered this agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico that these tariffs would be put on hold until March 4th, pending an evaluation of whether or not that help with securing the borders is accomplished. And so there's a lot going on here. And as we zoom out and kind of take a perspective to analyze and also apply an internal perspective to this, there's going to be a lot of opinion around this. And the initial announcement of tariffs was unsurprising. This is something that President Trump had promised on the campaign trail pretty consistently. But it still certainly created quite an uproar. And you could find data to support your position no matter what happened, right? The stock markets took a little bit of a downward trend, and Democrats largely used that to say the tariffs are causing a bad consequence. And on the other side, there was this quick agreement for greater border security from Canada and Mexico, and Republicans used that to say that, the tactic of using a tariff was effective. And so no matter what your opinion is on it, there is some data to back up your opinion. Now, President Trump also acknowledged that if the tariffs do go into place, that consumers are likely to feel, quote, some pain in the form of higher prices on goods. But he argues that the tariffs are needed to accomplish border security. So there's a comfortable place for you to land on your policy preference. And I'll just tell you up front, I'm not a big tariff guy. I think it's difficult to make tariffs work, but I think there's unequivocal evidence this week that they certainly were an effective negotiating tool for the purpose of accomplishing border security. And so there's going to be some continued tug and pull on the policy aspects of this. I would tell you that no matter how this plays out, as long as tariffs are a preferred negotiating tactic by this president or any other, it is going to generate white-hot debate and opinion on both Capitol Hill and across America, especially if there is some pain at the grocery store or at the gas pump or out in the broader economic argument. But as Jesus followers, I want to encourage us to carefully consider a couple of things as we consider this story. Number one, I really want to encourage us to engage this public debate specifically thoughtfully. There are, as we've already talked about, merited reasons to come to differing conclusions on this, and it is going to be a very visceral debate at times. And I want to encourage us that the ensuing and resulting public policy is going to be stronger when people of faith engage in good faith and engage thoughtfully. And so number one, I want to encourage us to do that in this situation. And number two, this goes back to the pain that American consumers might feel. I want us to take seriously our biblical mandate to be the vessel through which the needs of the poor are met in any economic environment. The Bible promises us in Deuteronomy that the poor will always be with us. So poverty is not an issue that is going to be solved, but rather if there's a strong economy or if we're living in an economy where greater numbers are suffering, either way, that role is primarily yours. It's primarily mine. Now, there is certainly a role that the government can play, and I think there is a reasonable debate that all of us from different political perspectives should happen. What is the appropriate role of the federal government in caring for the poor and the needy? But no matter where you land on this question, if you are a follower of Jesus, this job is primarily yours. I've given you some study resources in the Equipped version at theequippednewsletter.com to start with, but the Psalms and Proverbs are full of this mandate, and I mentioned a moment ago Deuteronomy 15:11. I think that's really a good place to start because of that reminder that the poor will always be with us. This is not an issue that you will solve completely on this side of heaven, but You and I are called to it anyway, and we're called to it for a number of reasons, but not the least of which, it has a way of continually turning our hearts away from an inward focus and turning it to those who are in need. And so as you engage this issue, this political issue of tariffs thoughtfully, no matter your opinion, keep that second point in mind. What is your role? How do you gain some proximity to the biblical mandate of caring for the poor and the needy? Hi, Faith Radio family. Than Bennett here with a special invitation for you. So much in our world today is screaming for us to be consumed by fear and division and brokenness. But the promise of the gospel means that our foundation is secure. We should live not from a place of fear, but instead our lives should be marked with power and with love and with sound minds. And so every week I'm sending out the Equipped newsletter. Every issue opens with truth from God's Word. From that vantage point of truth, we look at a handful of current events in our world. We do it not to simply consume information, but we do it looking for opportunities for the gospel of Jesus Christ to inject love and healing and redemption into those who need it. We close every issue with a simple reminder of something that is beautiful in our world. I want to invite you to join our community. You can sign up at theequippednewsletter.com. That'll trigger an email back to you. Just click to confirm. Again, it's theequippednewsletter.com. I'll see you there. The United States Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, it is being, quote, dismantled. That is the quote from Elon Musk. He also went on social media and said that he had spent the last couple of days feeding USAID to the, quote, wood chipper. But this is part of the new effort from the new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The announcement that USAID is being dismantled comes about a week after most U.S. foreign aid was paused, and a day after the termination of two USAID officials who denied DOGE officials access to certain classified parts of the USAID headquarters in Washington, D.C. Now, employees of USAID, whether they're stationed in D.C. or forward deployed in places around the world, most of them have been put on leave, and in the case of those who are stationed internationally, they have been instructed to return home, most of them within 30 days. Now, there is widespread expectation, although it's not clear at this point, but there's widespread expectation that President Trump and Elon Musk are leaning toward placing whatever portions of that agency survive and continue to go forward under the supervision of the State Department. Right now, USAID is a standalone agency created by Congress. This reorganization would move them back under the supervision of the State Department. But it's not exactly clear how that determination will be made or when it will be made, and so there's still a lot of moving parts around this story. You know, like the last story that we covered, there's going to be a lot of layers to the public debate surrounding this story. That's probably even more true where I live than you live. Where I live, there are a lot of people who work directly for USAID, and so there's not only the programmatic side of USAID that's getting attention. There's the employment side. A lot of people, a lot of federal employees are going to have a career change if this dismantling continues. But there are a lot of questions around this story that will generate different opinions amongst our community here at the Equip. Let me just run through a few of those questions. Number one, what role should U.S. taxpayer dollars play in international humanitarian aid? Should there be a role for U.S. taxpayer dollars? Number two, do the current programs and expenditures of USAID advance a worthwhile goal? There's a whole long list of expenditures that have been released by Elon Musk and others that call that into very serious question. Number three, does a president have authority to dismantle an agency created by Congress? Number four, are there national security concerns presented by either recipients of USAID, so overseas recipients, or maybe by the void that would be created by stopping the funding? There's an argument that there would be a void created that China may move in to fill. And then finally, I would submit this question to you. What are the most effective procedures for completing a review of this magnitude. I actually don't think very many people on any side of this issue would argue the fact that reform and review is probably necessary, but there is a question around what would be the most effective procedures and what properly takes into account the real-life implications of programs that are existing around the world. I would also tell you that it's very likely that a charity that you support around the world receives USAID funding, and so those organizations are now in the process of figuring out the best pathway forward to either keep programs in play, or where personnel cuts are needed or programmatic cuts, they're trying to make those determinations as well. So that's a little bit of analysis on the issue itself. But I think more important than your opinion or my opinion on any of that is a very clear understanding of our personal mandate around this story. And I put these two stories together for a reason, because that mandate is the same, right? It's the mandate to care for the poor and the needy among us. Whether USAID exists or doesn't exist, whether it's a mechanism by which churches or organizations or individuals partner with the U.S. government to meet needs around the world, whether that exists or doesn't, your job and mine is the same. It is to be on the lookout for, to identify, and then to come alongside the poor and the needy in our world. And so as we thoughtfully interact with this public debate, as we deal with the questions that I outlined above, and as we probably come to a variety of different opinions on the proper size and scope of the federal government, and wherever that proper size and scope is, what programs should the U.S. government be engaged in, as we come to different conclusions about those questions, we all need to be also grappling with the question of how will we live our lives sacrificially on behalf of the poor. You know, if you're an American citizen, you have this tremendous ability to have your government reflect your views. However, the final place that it lands is never going to be perfectly mirrored with your opinion. But no matter where your government sets its policies, you can still walk in that beautiful personal invitation of the gospel to, quote, uphold the cause of the poor. We find that in Psalm 82:3, and I want that to be our mantra this week as we consider these first two stories. How can you uphold the cause of the poor? Our final story of the week is a brief one, but it hits close to home for me. It happened just a few miles from our family home. After about 15 years of safe flights, about 8 billion passengers flown without a fatal commercial airline crash in the United States, that streak ended very tragically over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. this week. An American Airlines flight that had 64 people on board collided midair just before landing with an Army Black Hawk helicopter that was carrying 3 soldiers. There were no survivors on either aircraft, and investigators are continuing to pull wreckage from the river. I drove by it yesterday and continuing to work to determine the cause of the crash. Look, there's no easy way to discuss a story like this. There are families of 67 loved ones who are grieving loss this week. I think it's our job as the equipped community to look for ways to comfort the grieving. That we find that admonition in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 4. You know, also, as investigators continue their work, there's going to be a lot of conjecture, a lot of guessing, a lot of theories in the public debate about what happened here. We, as the equipped family, should lend our voice to that debate in a way that reduces the likelihood of a future tragedy. So let's be careful with the information as it comes out, and let's use our voice for a positive impact. And finally, the last thought I'd leave you with on this difficult story is that every day is a gift from your Heavenly Father. So rejoice because you have air in your lungs. Rejoice because of the relationships in your life, and rejoice because of the certainty that you have in eternity. This earth and all that is in it is temporary, but heaven is forever, and all of it is for His glory. So stand on that truth as you interact with this difficult story this week. The beautiful segment this week is titled Much More Valuable, and as always, I encourage you to open up your email, and if you don't get the email, you can go to the archives at theequippednewsletter.com. But check out the image provided by my wife, Brooke, that goes along with this story. You know, the recent snow that we've had in our region, it has dramatically increased the quality of our bird watching because they're all flocking to the bird feeders that are up and out of the snow so that they can have some sustenance. And it has just been a very specific reminder of how much the Creator cares about His creation. And you, my friend, are so much more valuable than the birds of the air. We find that in Matthew 6:26. He says, "Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" You are. I'm Than Bennett. This is The Equipped, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this conversation from The Equipped. These conversations are available because of your support. Become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. And please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and share it with friends so together we can stay informed and be equipped to serve.